Okay. We gonna see how this.
Oh my days.
Hey, that's
Okay.
a little bit of a bit of sport there, because we changing a bit of providers here today, folks. So you might
Yeah,
have to
moving
bear with
house.
us as we move house a little bit here this week. So a few little things might happen every now and then. But anyway, we'll see. Hey guys, how are we doing? Welcome again to another episode of the Living Room. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As usual, it's myself, Andre, and my good friends Philip and Mark. If this is your first time, you're on the We Global platform, whether it's you're watching on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on Facebook. If this is your first time, hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell, whatever it is, so you can always come in and have these Caribbean conversations that we just love to have and bring to you every Sunday afternoon, evening, morning, wherever it is that you are. And just remember to hit share as well and tag at least 20 friends. We're going up every
Hey.
week. Tag at least 20 friends and bring in as many people as you can into the conversation, because the
Yep.
more
That's been your
people we
standard.
have into the conversation, the better the conversation always is. Hope you guys are having a good afternoon. Guys, how we doing?
Yeah, man. Pretty
Doing all
good.
right.
Pretty good. What about you?
Yeah, man. I just hear a little getting into the groove of this new thing that we on here. We just trying a different place here, guys. So
Not trying to
I'm
find
feeling.
where to put things.
Yeah. You know how that
Yeah.
is go too.
Yeah.
You know how that is go. So we trying a little thing there to see if we can make that work. But that's all right. That's all right. How things
Yeah.
going at your outside?
Yeah, man. We doing pretty all right. I done your site tomorrow, actually. Funny enough.
Oh,
But
you in London?
yeah, man. Yeah, for a change. But things going
Business.
pretty good. Business. I like how you said that, Phil. Business. Yeah.
Oh, business.
Business, man.
Yeah, man.
Oh, we were
But
checking out the networks.
no, you go. We talking about the curb. What's the curb site going to be like in the future? You know,
You mean
not
say
that this is
what?
well, what you would call the sidewalk, yeah.
We would call you say what? Yeah, you see, if it was like curb,
Well,
Sidewalk is
curb,
not
trying to, wait, is it
enthusiastic
trying to
watching
stop now?
TV.
sidewalk is not a technical term.
Oh,
You deal with the curb.
Mm.
see. That's what the Caribbean people don't want to see when the Brits want to come back. 'Cause talk about sidewalk is not a technical term. Sidewalk is a very technical term.
So you're looking at the sidewalk of the future.
Yeah,
Right.
man. What is it? What are the provisions that it will need to be catering for? It's quite
Okay.
an interesting question.
But Phil,
That
you
is
asked the
something.
right question, because as these may start looking, they're trying to stop you from doing something.
Oh my days.
Mm-hmm.
You know it is.
Yeah.
Just no
I wouldn't
No
look
more
at it that way.
walking.
just
No
no
more walking.
curb
No, man,
cat,
we like
curb
walking. We
cats
like
coming.
walking.
Oh, you
We
like
like walking.
pedestrians? Okay.
Curb cats coming. Watch us see.
Hey, don't take another step. Don't take another step.
Watch
Pay-
and see,
pay
man.
by
Watch
walk.
and see.
yeah,
Curb cats coming as good as
I
a
know
saying.
I know my man like a lot of running, Phil. So
yeah.
as soon as he
No,
cross
I got
over
running
that
road
curb.
now. I got running road now.
Right in the middle. Right.
Once you're going more than 2 miles an hour, you have to use the road.
Yeah.
And then pay
Considered a
road
vehicle.
tax.
Yeah.
You know how this is work too in England.
Yeah,
You know
Fundraising.
you know how this is work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Nah, you just give it some time. Give it some time, man. What's
No,
wrong
we
with you?
good,
What's
we
wrong
good,
with
we
you?
good. We give it some time, man. We no problem with that. We just give it. We wait and see what y'all come up with.
Phil,
Well,
I
y'all,
was to tell you that when you said in the show last week that your plants died, man. I had a
Yeah.
similar experience, man. My peppers collapsed on
Seriously?
me this week, man. Yeah,
So
peppers,
they're all gone?
drink water and my
That's what the plant said.
man, my peppers just I schoolboy error. Let me call it that. A schoolboy error.
So you
Man.
added fertilizer as well.
I put a little drop of fertilizer in last week.
These men, man, these men.
They were too young. So
Yeah.
the
Too
peppers,
young. You have to
the
let the
peppers duck
thing
out
take
on me,
root
man.
first.
It's easy, man.
Yeah.
I saw your lettuce looking really good, man. You got some
Listen.
good heads there, man.
Listen, grotto here now, man. Grotto. Just know you can be selling out front of your house. Better yet, on the curb before you ban me. Just know. Now, man, the lettuce coming out. The carrots now too. The carrots now take root now. So you can see the second stage leafing coming out now, which tells you that they've taken root and everything
Easy,
is
man.
coming through. Just saying, you know how these
It's
things
taking
go.
root. Good.
They take a root now, and the carrot is forming underneath. That's when you see the second stage leafing coming out. So which tells me, okay. Same thing with the beets too. Same thing with the beets.
Actually, yeah, my beats started to come through this week. I was to send you a picture, man.
Man, get a picture and send it
Yeah.
out, man.
Well,
Celebrate you. No, You ain't putting the fertilizer on it, no?
No, the beets are good. The beets are
Oh,
good.
good. I just checking, looking out for you.
So where you put fertilizer on the peppers? Well,
Now, I was just doing a little water sprinkle, just to get
Yeah.
them, because they actually came up, and they were up for about 2 or 3 weeks. So I thought, yeah, they should be strong enough now. But nah, man, fellas curl up and died on me. So I might still try and do another set
not bad.
this week.
Mm.
It's not
Yeah.
too late.
For my man there for some advice. See what you can tell me.
I'm always here. I'm always here, man.
Angela said you kill the roots with water. That's also a problem. You could also
That is
put
true.
in too much water, which is true.
This
That
is
is very
probably
true.
true too. You could put in too much water, but again, I have those problems, right? I have been following a good regime, and everything has been working fine.
And these are the
Working
kind
well.
of problems that us farmers have every year. You make mistakes and you learn and thing, man. What's wrong with you, man? Come
And it
on.
rains.
No,
it rains. It
I
rains
ain't with
more up
y'all.
north than down in London.
Yeah.
So-
Get a lot of fat rain down there. Yeah.
Hey, no jokes. We had 2 days of a bit of rain the last couple of days. It's always made me wonder, what is it? I'm not Philip, you have to tell me here now. What it is that comes out of water as it goes through, or what do we put in that causes water coming the tap not to work on plants the way how rainwater works? Man, because 2 days of drizzle and these plants like they're on steroids,
They
man.
jump up.
Yeah, man. They love it.
It'd be like, so yeah, I'd be wetting y'all all day, not all day, but obviously quite consistently. And then a day and a half of this light rain that you get here, and it's almost as if the man saying, finally. So it make me wonder, what is it that either we take out or that we put in?
I
when
think
we
it's
run water
a
through
mix of the
taps.
two. Actually.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly what, but I know we would. The treatment of the water, using fluoride and so on, actually isn't great for the plants. The stuff that we would
okay.
add to purify it. But then
okay.
also that purification process would take out some of the natural nitrates and so on that would come from rainwater. So,
Aye.
Okay. Yeah, see, I know Phil would know, man.
well, I did some reading after my plants died.
I think
That
that's
was
the
it.
wrong way around. Though. I think you should do some reading before.
Well, there are different ways of learning.
Man, listen, Phil. Once he lose a batch one season, you know what can happen.
You'll be a
there,
different
right?
man. You'll be a different man. But mind you,
Just leave him. Just leave him. Let him enjoy this season, man. He's having a good season, man.
you won't hear you talking about lettuce again.
Ever.
Listen, all these things are learning, as when you figure out. But at the moment, I good.
All right.
Don't jealous me, man. Don't wish bad on me.
Man,
Nobody
man,
wishing bad on you.
No,
Just
man. You
checking,
see, no.
just
You
checking.
see,
We ain't
no.
wishing bad on you.
Nobody
I
wishing
just
bad on you.
checking,
We're just
checking.
telling you the realities of planting. You get
Yeah,
to
it's an
September someplace
experience.
and you don't have a harvest.
Exactly.
I
And to
got
be
harvest.
honest, if something bad was, and I hope it doesn't happen to your crop, I wouldn't say a word. I would just
We
offer
will keep it. We
consolation.
won't break any show. We won't break.
Exactly.
No, does anybody really believe it? I don't think so. I
Honestly,
really don't think so.
we won't do that with you, man.
No.
man.
But anyway, we got to say Happy Mother's Day.
Oh yes, of course.
Happy
Of
Mother's
To
course.
Day.
all the mothers across the region.
Of
Happy
course.
Mother's Day to you all. Hope
you
you're
know.
having a fantastic day. Breakfast in bed, big postcard, flowers. But today's Eat Out Day, boy, because I remember in Barbados,
that
boy,
goes
this is
without
Eat
saying.
Out Day, boy. You may tell you can't get in a restaurant on Mother's
That
Day.
goes
Man.
without saying, boy. They're all out today enjoying themselves, being deservingly so as well, I should say.
Deservingly so.
Deservingly so.
100%. 100%.
We got to celebrate our mothers, man.
So
happy
happy
Mother's
mothers are
Day.
having a fantastic day
I'll
so
eat and
far.
criticize and say, this macaroni pie tastes like mine.
Just chew it and swallow. Chew it and swallow.
And be thankful.
It tastes fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
It tastes fantastic, I am sure. Just chew and swallow.
Yeah, man. I saw your boy Dr. Ronnie Yearwood this week.
This is true.
Friend of the living room. Don't let me just call him
That's
your
right. He
your
was
boy,
here in the living room.
Friend of the
We had
living
a
room
good
who
chat
came
on
and saw us
constitutions
last
and stuff.
November. I saw him elected as the president of the Democratic Labour Party, man.
I saw that, which is congrats to him. Congratulations to him. Indeed, we'll see how that goes. He's got his work cut out for him. Let me tell you,
He sure
serious
does.
work
That's
cut
a
out
lot
for
of
him where
work.
that party's concerned. I saw it, and it was on when we look at the elections and stuff. I think we talk about it on election night in Barbados as well when we had our show. You could see it happening. You can just see from the comments and people. There's one or two bright sparks, and he was kind of head and shoulders above the rest, to be honest. The question would be, after back-to-back 30 nils, is it too soon? Because this is a long haul.
Well, this is the question that
This is a
it's
long
an
haul.
important question, actually.
So that's the question that I would bring. Will he see being prime minister? Considering how far back the Democratic Labour Party is, so it's an interesting one. I think the similar thing had hit with David Thompson back in the day as well, and he kind of stepped aside and then came back because once you in
Even
for
though
so
that's-
long, that's gonna take some time. So it'd be interesting to see. There's a lot to unpack there. I was thinking it through quite a lot this week. That's almost a whole show. You know how I like my politics. I'm gonna bore everybody
We do.
with my my.
Well, we would know
my
now
thesis.
when we put the invitation on the table and he comes back. We would know how things are moving.
Well, he's a friend of the show, so
Well, of course.
15, 20 years from now, when we're still doing the show, we hope we get an invitation. It comes.
It seemed that coming to the living room, Dr. Christina Hines, Dr. Ronnie Yearwood, people just move on, man.
This is becoming a rite of passage now. So
You seeing a pattern?
Exactly.
We seeing a pattern, and not that we make a conscious effort to go after politicians. Huh? We don't.
Indeed, we don't.
We actually do the complete opposite. We try to leave them out of everything and just have discussions with ordinary people. But so far, we've had some young boy Khalil as well. He's gone on. He's nominated to be a senator.
He was in the living room as well.
He was in the living room as well. So there you go. These things are good. A couple of things as well, because I think I saw it in Barbados as well, where Barbados is trying to engage with the diaspora, or as I hear some people calling it these days, diaspora.
No, man, we ain't going with
I don't know where that comes from, but anyhow,
diaspora.
Yeah, diaspora. And one of the comments that the I think her name is Sandra Husbands. I can't remember the portfolio that she holds from a ministerial perspective, but she's one of the ministers in the government now. But she was saying the reason why that program seems to be failing is because there are a number of Barbadians living overseas who might be undocumented and therefore unwilling to come forward because of fear they might be tracked.
What?
Exactly. That was my
what? Where should get that from?
I was like, what is this woman talking about? I was like, what a way to blame a failure on something that is completely unrelated. It was just a silly thing to say,
I am buying that. I don't know where she coming with that one.
I mean, what's our data? She had to sort of even nudge that as a supposition.
But I think she was also speaking to a university in the US, actually, some people on the subject. And I was like, I could not believe.
And that's the sort of thing you'd actually say outside of.
Oh,
we
yeah.
got a lot of undocumented Bajans.
Some Bajans out here running about that ain't got no documentation and they don't want me track them.
Well, Lord.
Wow. This lady has any common sense?
That's sad. That's just like how you don't. Yeah, that's actually a slap in the face.
It is.
Putting down your own people.
It is. It is.
It was really a very silly comment. It was really a very silly comment.
Very disappointing one as well.
And don't worry, Angela. I don't think she's silly. The comment was silly.
So you can't separate the two.
No matter where you look at it, the comment was a silly comment. And it was actually quite, out of place as well.
Well, I mean, I can only speak from being a Bajan in the diaspora here in the UK, but I know we are all over the place. But I actually think the efforts being made here in the UK to try and bring the Bajan population together are quite good. And
quite good.
And
has a friend in the living room that's been doing that as well.
Well, then again, that is true too.
How are you doing?
That is true. If Betty, you're listening, thank you. Good afternoon. Wow. So It's good though to see. It's good though to see that at least people recognize the value in the diaspora.
I think so too. And there's a lot there that the diaspora has to offer. The only one of the things, because I commented, you know how I always get
You
myself
can't
in these
help.
places.
You
I
can't
can't
help.
help it.
I know.
I see these comments and I try to let me just read it
Just
on
try
my
to
comment.
restrain yourself.
Yeah, but then I can't help it. And interestingly enough, on that particular comment, there were loads of, I guess, people within the diaspora who were commenting on that one and making some valid points as well. Ease of the way how it's hard to do business, a whole bunch of different things, and that kind of stuff. What? It got squatted enough. Okay, Dennis. But there were a lot of people living outside the Caribbean who were commenting on that, making, as I said, some valid points regarding ease of doing business, opening bank accounts, which is a comment that I see right across the region. People are talking about, and governments are trying to do something about it as well.
Yeah.
And in many cases, as in Barbados, not in Barbados, yes, in Barbados, the conversation that they had when they invited a bunch of banks and stuff to Barbados to speak on, a lot of it has to do with the regulation that Caribbean banks need to comply with, or that banks that are based in the Caribbean need to comply with, because of distrust, really, of the Caribbean, and distrust of the things that we put in place to ensure that nothing untoward is happening. And so very often there are a lot of hoops to put through for us to jump through. So some we cause on ourselves, but a lot of it is caused due to regulation. But a lot of people from outside the region were commenting on it. And one of the things that I really don't like sometimes is sometimes you just get this air of entitlement from people who live outside the Caribbean, feeling as if somehow, if you want me to do anything back in the Caribbean, well, you got to do something for me. I understand. As I said, there were lots of points that were made that were good as far as ease of doing business and da 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 da. But for me, it's like, come on, man. And like, if you want to invest in home, invest in home.
Yeah.
But start behaving as if there's this entitlement that governments across the region, and of course, this is Barbados we're talking about, but it's something that you see right across the region, need to do something for you. You gotta get something in order for you to invest at home, and you seem entitled to it. It's really annoying. I hate to see it.
Or as if everything at home is broken and
Yeah,
there's nothing
exactly.
to be celebrated there. So therefore, everything we're doing down there wrong. So
Exactly. Everything down
yeah,
there
that
costs
is.
so much money. And I had to point out to some people, hey, we live in London. With some things it could cost you £20 a day to get to and from work. And that's right. I said £20 a day, depending where you live, if you're working in London, to get to and from work. We complain now, we pay. We might
pay ain't
complain,
along, man.
but we pay.
Pay ain't along.
You understand? You walk on the road, as we just find out. Curb tax can soon come.
Come in.
My man.
Come in.
Listen. I have not said anything about any curb tax.
That's true. But you could almost feel as if everything you do, you're being taxed for. You live in New York, exact same thing. The amount of money you pay to rent a 1-bedroom flat or what have you. But we go and we pay. But then all of a sudden, you got to invest back home. And home need to do something for we. We need to get this. We need to get that. If you want me to do this, they're like, man, hush up, man. If you were going to invest at home, you were going to invest at home.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
and I'm sure that our guest today it will be able to draw that comparison, having lived here and back in Jamaica as well.
I think so. And today we get having a conversation with Rosalea Hamilton from Jamaica. She explained to us why this is important. I want to say Professor Rosalea Hamilton and not the other Rosalea Hamilton, because they're two of note in Jamaica. And she heads up the Philanthropic Society. And we're going to really have a good conversation around philanthropy across the region, because I think it's a very important conversation to have.
Indeed, social change, environment, and everything associated with this area. Rosalea has her hand across quite a few of these areas, and looking forward to the conversation and also hearing about what's going on in Jamaica. It's always full of intrigue.
In Jamaica. Jamaica is a cool place, man. Cool runnings. I only even went there once. You ever went to Jamaica?
Yeah.
Of course, I went to Jamaica in 1989, man. Up in halfway tree, had some curry goat and some Lovely chicken and stuff.
and stuff sound there. And stuff there. So ominous there. Like, oh, I mean, on stuff.
Jerk chicken.
Okay, a festival. A good festival.
No problem.
Festival in
Hey,
Dublin is
look,
what he
without
means.
any further ado, I'm sure that Rosalie can tell us everything about Jamaica. We're going to bring Rosalie in. As usual, just give her a warm living room welcome, guys.
Hello, Rosalie. How are you, man?
Hi, how are you?
Hey,
We're doing well. How are you?
I am doing very well.
Mhm.
I see you enjoyed our curry goat and jerk chicken.
Yeah, man.
All right, so you guys have to come on down and enjoy.
yeah.
I've been once. I was up in the touristy area, though, up in Ochi and stuff with cruise and that kind of thing. So I haven't experienced the fullness of Jamaica yet, but I must do.
You half your life gone if you haven't done it.
Oh, is
Alright
it?
then.
All right.
All right.
All right. I need to get back half my life then. So I'm going to definitely come down.
Don't know what he's missing.
Absolutely.
So look, let's start first of all, Rosalie, by understanding before we get into all this stuff that you do. First of all, understanding who you are and where you're coming from in terms of your interest in all of the various areas that we're going to talk about this evening.
Okay, well, I am a Jamaican woman who, feel passionately about the need to change the world.
Oh wow.
We're born in this world and there are all kinds of problems. Ever since I was a child, you hear all these issues, and I just kind of feel, the human purpose of life. We're all put on this earth to make a difference. And so, ever since I was in school, I went to school in Jamaica, Immaculate Conception High School, and then I went to England, did undergraduate there. Then I went to New York, did my master's at Columbia University, then went on to the PhD and a law degree. So I've studied a lot because I really I wanted to understand the world.
Okay.
So I started from psychology, then went into international affairs and economics and law, all of these to understand the world we're living in and why we have so much problems and how to fix it.
And what have you found out in your quest for understanding?
Well, I'll give you an interesting story because I ended up doing the PhD because I felt, the real problems of the world are rooted in economics. Yes, that was my thinking. But I started in undergraduate. So when I returned home to Jamaica, one of our, well-known economists, George Beckford, was at the end of his life. And so I had the opportunity to sit with him. I literally visited him while he was in bed sick, And so I said, George Beckford, you're such a profound economist. I'm a young economist just returning home. How do we fix the economy? And he said to me, well, I really think the problems lie in psychology. So I left.
Wow.
I've been doing a lot of reading and work in psychology. And I said, wow, because I just left psychology in undergrad.
Into economics.
Into economics because I was thinking we'd find the problems there, and the solutions there. So it was an interesting conversation that gave me a very early indication that there are multidimensional solutions to the problems we face. And psychology and economics are just two of them.
And where has psychology taken you just out of interest?
Well, one of the things we take for granted as we interact with human beings is that we are all in a similar state of psychological well-being. And what my understanding of psychology has taught me is you have to be aware that we're not all at the same level. Sometimes we're communicating and the communication is not always received in the same way at the same level, in terms of some people are just preoccupied with other issues that lead them into depression and altered states and especially, I would say, my experience working with women who've been abused and victims and survivors of gender-based violence is the amount of psychological impact it has created and how much is repressed and how much gets manifested later in life in many ways in marriages that lead to the breakdown of marriages, etc., etc. So it is a very complex field. So I do have a very good appreciating. And a lot of the work I do, we do psychosocial interventions and so on because we recognize that, the psychological states of all of us matter.
That's really interesting.
So do you find with those three areas that there's a lot of overlap? So for example, you would use psychology to understand the state of society and the state of human beings, economy to model it in a wider perspective or to give it a bit more context, and then law as a way of intervention?
Yes, in fact, my PhD thesis sought to understand the motivation of workers because I studied wages, prices, and productivity. And so in understanding productivity and productivity growth, there is an important role for the work, the motivations of workers to work. What motivates you? What keeps you going? And one of the fascinating things I found along the way, this is work done by a very famous Jamaican sociologist called Stone, and he found that money was not the major motivator for workers. It was respect.
Respect.
And if we think about it, it makes a lot of sense coming out of a colonial society in which most of us were disrespected on a regular basis, especially in the workplace.
And are those findings universal, or was that specific? Or is that specific to
Jamaica? But I suspect that similar findings could be found across the Caribbean.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow,
that's really good insight.
Yeah, it is.
I would imagine so.
Your home nation is one that we are always fascinated by, Rosalie, because Jamaica is such a complex place. I mean, like all of the Caribbean, but it has some peculiarities. And I wonder if your journey has given you much deeper insight to understanding Jamaican people, and what it would really take to answer that question that you as an economist is looking to answer.
I too am fascinated by Jamaicans.
Oh, yes.
I think we're fascinated by ourselves because we have this kind of endless spirit of achieving the impossible. We have a saying in Jamaica, we know how to make bread out of stone. And that's the spirit of Jamaica, I know and understand. But every time we do something, we do a first in the world, any kind of accomplishment, we all marvel at what we can do.
So that bread out of stone, that's where hard dough bread comes from.
That's a very good one.
I have no words.
I'm not going down that road with you, right? Leave Jamaica alone, right?
I think you're gonna
that
have
is
to
almost
rescind
our
his
national
invitation.
dish, so don't bother with us and the hard bread.
Listen, I apologize for that.
No, I must tell you a joke because I lived in London, right? And I lived Dalston. It was close to a market, right? Forgot the name of the market now. And so Saturday mornings, my regular habit was to get up early, go to the bakery near to that market to buy hard bread.
Yeah.
That was my Saturday morning breakfast, hard bread with butter.
It tastes good.
It's got to be
I
done.
love it.
It's got to be done.
Don't mess with Jamaicans and the hard bread. No. We're serious about that.
So you were telling us about the complexity of your people.
Yeah. We are complex because I think we inherit the best and the worst of humanity, and I'll say that without being ashamed, because the reality is that we are among the world's most murderous countries in the world.
Okay.
And I mean, that level of violence is the ugly part of humanity.
True.
But on the other hand, I would say we inherit the best in the world. And you know these people. It's the Bob Marleys, it's, excellence in sports and, fastest man, fastest woman in the world. And, a host of people we know in our family who are just good human beings who will give you their last shirt on the back to make you comfortable and to make you feel at home. So we are complex in that sense of, we inherit these very good, very bad tendencies and we try to balance it. Of course, I'm going to tell you that most of us are on the good side, right?
Yeah, of course. And I have no doubt about that.
And I think the data bears that out because a lot of this crime is concentrated in certain communities. So, people hear that and feel, but my view is that even if it is in one place, it's not good enough. And we have to find a way to root out those problems that creates this kind of badness that we have.
But do you think enough of us, and not just speaking about Jamaica, but right across the region, do you think we have a sufficient understanding of that, how psychology plays into helping us understand and perhaps come out of and liberate us ourselves from perhaps some of the thinking that's still perpetuating some of the bad behavior?
We have some ideas about it. I mean, we don't all have to do masters or PhDs in psychology to understand it, but it's an important question you're asking because one of our greatest songwriters and musicians, Bob Marley, has broken it down very simply. There's a need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. That's a powerful statement about the psychology of who we are. And Bob understood it was rooted in our history. Our history that taught us to hate ourselves. That taught us that we have to look outside ourselves for the answers. But he also understood that the very institutions that set out to perpetuate that, we can find a way around that and still become who we are and become great. And that's what he did. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he didn't go to the school systems that have perpetuated a lot of these colonial ideas. School dropout, right? And so was not as indoctrinated as many of us were and have been and are. And so he found pride in himself through that long tradition of resistance that existed in the worst time of the enslavement of Africans. That there was always this spirit of resistance because we knew and we understood that what was happening to us was inhumane. It's just not something that we could accept. And so we fought back then till now, and we're still fighting. And so his message to us to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery is a message to let us recognize that this is an issue we all have to confront coming out of that colonial process. And that goes to the colonizers as well as those who are colonized, because the children of the colonizers who are still in our region also have psychological issues.
Yes, it's true.
I listened to your earlier part of the show where you're talking about this sense of entitlement that we tend to have. Where did, in the diaspora, but we have it in the Caribbean as well among some people. Where did that come from? That's a whole inheritance of a set of individuals who felt, this is my society. I can do what I want to do with it, and I can behave how I want to behave. And I'm entitled to the best of what the society has to offer. And some people are not. That all came from that history. So the issue is a very good question. It is complex, but I think our people understand it intuitively, understand it by our own social experience, no matter where we're placed in the society. And I think it is at the heart of the challenges that we have today to fix these social problems.
But we understand it, but it's so deep rooted, it takes time to break it and break hold of it fully. Because even though we understand it, and quoting Bob's quote, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, so many people do it. I'm sure you can see so many people have it on their social media platforms or their statuses and stuff. So we know it, but it still seems so hard to break it.
Because of its complexities. And the complexities are rooted in social systems and institutions that perpetuate themselves to today. So, one of the very eye-opening experience for Jamaicans was what happened in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter protests in America. That, of course, as you know, has had a profound impact on all of us.
In the world.
We found out that our Governor General was wearing an insignia
Oh, yes.
with a white angel on the head of a black Satan or a devil. Now, if that was not an ironic situation that woke the society up, nothing else did.
Okay.
And it tells us how subtle we perpetuate these norms.
Yes.
Because back then, that was just another insignia. That's how the things are. But in 2020, that we have a Governor General who is wearing it speaks to how we perpetuate unthinkingly these traditions.
Agreed.
Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, and it's in that sense, the problems are complex because we're sometimes not even aware of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I was going to ask, how was that discovered, actually?
That's a very good question. It's not too clear to me how, because, of course, social media puts everything out. But, I must say the Governor General did recognize, I don't know if he knew before. I don't think anybody asked him that question. I'm not aware if he knew of it before wearing it. But he has since stopped wearing and apparently had started an investigation. I don't think I've seen a report. I don't know what formally came out of it, but I know that he stopped wearing.
But what are you going to investigate, though? Because
already did.
Presumably the insignia has been worn for decades.
Absolutely.
So what is it you investigated? Huh? Someone snuck it in.
And there's so many other habits and norms that we carry. I mean, one of the most devastating one, I think, is how we perpetuated what some of us call an apartheid system of education in Jamaica. If you are among the privileged few and you have wealth, let me say that my father worked very hard in his lifetime to be able to afford me one of that kind of education. And so I went to one of the best schools in Jamaica. And then you get good education. And if you don't have wealth, if you don't have position, and you don't have, links, as we say in Jamaica, you end up in these other kinds of schools in which you get second-class education. That's the system we've inherited to today.
Wow.
And it's embodied in a report that was done just last year. This was a Tertiary Education Commission report that was chaired by Orlando Patterson from Harvard. Now, what can I say? These institutions are real. They perpetuate the problem, and we have to root them out.
But although it's such a complex thing, are there ways of, and this is maybe where economics helps us there as well, are there ways of measuring progress out of that? And are we seeing, even if it is a slow movement, are we actually seeing measurable progress towards us emancipating ourselves from mental slavery?
There are measures. There are several measures that one can use. A lot of the international benchmarks about, for example, whether it is women's engagement in, say, managerial level, in which Jamaica, for example, rises to the top of the world. In 2015, I think it was, where, in terms of number of female managers, we're among the best. With the highest ratios. So those kinds of ratios exist. For the first time, we've seen, for example, the highest proportion of women in parliament, not necessarily at the level we want, but we see progress there in terms of movements. If we look at poverty levels, we've seen movements. There are several indicators we can use to suggest that there is progress. But as much as there are progress, we see declines, and we see movements in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And again, crime is an example of that. If you look at, for example, our GDP per capita, this is something that our Minister of Finance brought to the attention of the nation, that when we tracked it from our independence, we've really not moved very far. And so in terms of the average well-being of Jamaicans, we're not doing as good as we ought to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we also see another troubling sign is the disparity of wealth, the growing inequality that we're seeing in Jamaica, across the region and across the world. Very troubling.
Is interesting you bring that, because just today, I was just watching the news and I was thinking, just watching some stuff going on in the US. And one of the things I always say, it's just amazing how, as a country, let's forget all the ills and stuff for a second, not talking about that. I'm just looking as a country, how they've managed to develop such a vast land mass relatively equally. And I use relatively equally loosely, but you know what I mean, relatively equally. But smaller countries, even, and take Jamaica or even the Caribbean in that vein, don't seem to be able to do it. And you always wonder why not? Why is it that everything is still so concentrated in Kingston or Bridgetown or what have you, and then you go out from there and everything seems like a throwback like 20 years behind or something like that? And that's something I always marvel about United States. And I'm only using the Caribbean for reference, obviously, because we're Caribbean people. But you see the same thing in many countries across the world, whether you look at South American countries or even European countries as well, who just have smaller land mass, but just hasn't been able to develop themselves equally across the board. And you're just wondering, what's the mental state that caused you to not do that? Or is it, as you were just saying, not that you were just saying, but using some of what you just said, that perpetuating that classism suits a purpose, and therefore we lose sight of the whole goal?
I'd be careful about describing America and some of the countries even
it's a loose
Europe
comparison,
as even development, because having lived there for 20 years, there is a lot of uneven development, and those are rooted, right? So
that's what I said, notwithstanding the ills, I know there's still
so I think the problem you're pointing to correctly is the persistence of these pockets of inequality across the world. And a lot of that has to do, again, with the perpetuation of these institutions that were rooted in inequality. And so we have to make a very conscious effort to root them out. So there are two ways to think about these social problems. There is the baggage and the historical legacies that we've inherited that provides the kind of inherited assets that we have. So we're born into wealth, or we have access to education and so on. So those are all of that coming from the past. But then the other side, another 50%, in fact, studies have pointed to a lot of this as, associated with 50% of the explaining current well-being. The other 50% has to do with the choices we make, the contemporary choices, the decisions that we make. And so if we want to change the system, it sounds to me like we have to root out some of these institutional legacies that are not fit for purpose. They're not suited for the modern world. And we have to simultaneously make new decisions about the contemporary problems, especially embracing the amazing range of technologies that we now have. And it is when we do neither, then we have a problem. And if we do only one, we still have a problem. And if we do, so we kind of have to tackle all of them simultaneously, and we have to be guided by empirical evidence that guides us about how we can make that structural shift. And so some of the work that I've been doing with a colleague of mine in the Caribbean, Professor Vanus James from Tobago, is to identify some of these key drivers. When we look across countries across the world and you try to explain, countries in developed countries that have much higher GDP per capita say, and you look at the disparity across the world where you're seeing, for example, countries in the West that have over $100,000 in terms of average GDP per capita. But you find countries in Africa that have GDP of under $1,000, right? And just to give you, in the case of the Caribbean, we have Haiti, one of the poorest, 1,000 GDP per capita, but you have Puerto Rico and Bahamas about 30,000. So the disparities are there. And when you look across all countries, we are seeing at least three things. We know that the institutions matter. And when we use measures to track institutional change, we see that we have to fix those institutions. We absolutely have to embrace technologies and create technologies, not just to buy and import foreign technology. We have to get in the business of creating it.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So innovation and change is pivotal. And then we also need to ensure that the GDP has enough capital goods in terms of the share of GDP in the output, the capital ratio of GDP to capital goods to GDP, so as to stimulate the kinds of productivity growth that's necessary to transform the economy. So there are ways we can package answers that addresses the complexity of the issues. Because of course, when you talk about institutions, you're also talking about psychology. When you're talking about technology, you're talking about psychology, because if you're not innovative and bold and creative, you're not going to be part of that cutting edge technological.
So true. So true.
Yeah.
But what's stopping us though? Because we are innovative and bold and we are creative, but there's still some things that for whatever reason we still think are beyond us. And technology is one of those things that I always focus on a lot. We seem very focused on buying, on using or importing,
consuming,
rather than creating. And in 2022, there's nothing stopping us from doing that. As a creative, as a people as we are.
Yes, and again, if you think about who we are, there are some of us, like the Bob Marleys of this world, right, who have experienced a kind of resistance sociology that says, I am confident about who I am. I'm not going to buy into this negative psychology that says I'm not good enough. And I am so confident that I'm going to tackle the world on my terms. I'm going to be part of that generation that is going to create new music, our music, and we're going to tell you how to love it, right? And we started talking earlier about the complexity of Jamaica. That's who we are. We kind of unapologetic. That's who we are. Love us or hate us, you know. And that comes from that confidence of that part of our society that understands resistance and understands that we have to be bold and confident. But then there's another part of our society who are still lacking in self-confidence, who still think it's important to bleach in order to get ahead in life. When you look in the mirror, you're not proud about who you are. And importantly, it's not just their psychology, it's the psychology of a society that rewards continuously people who look
of lighter
complexion. So they fit into a society in which, looking lighter and less black is a status symbol and is rewarding. So it's part of the complexity, and we have to be able to shift that focus away from embracing the status quo, those inherited norms, and repositioning to the kind of reggae, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, all of these musicians that led that message that we are who we are.
Tremendous. Look, I know you're so passionate about advocating for others. I feel I have to ask you, how did you actually discover this passion of wanting to advocate on behalf of others? And I think the reason I asked that is because when we first spotted you, it was the work that you were doing with the Ukraine students who were trying to get out. And I thought, there's someone who really cares and understands people. How did you discover your passion for advocating for people?
It's rooted in my understanding of life. As a young girl growing up in Jamaica, very early, I asked this existential question: what is life about? Who are we? Right? Why are we here? What is this thing called Earth and the world?
So those are the sort of questions you asked as a younger.
As a child, I recall that when I was in high school, I asked those questions, and I understood early that people placed a lot of emphasis on wealth. Unfortunately, I had parents who worked hard all their life to give us the basic needs, and we grew up comfortably. And I understood that my lot in life was never about trying to survive and eke out a living, thanks to my parents.
Right.
And I say that because if I didn't, perhaps I would focus on making money like a lot of people, because if you don't make money, you can't live.
That's a very empathetic statement.
So my view then was, okay, so if I can manage in life and make enough money to live, then what else is life about? Because you're not going to go to the grave with wealth. You're going to die and leave all this wealth, right? So I struggled with it for many years, and I began very early understanding that this life is about living for others. And I later found that it's embodied in this important and priceless South African philosophy called Ubuntu. I am because you are before, because I am because you are because I am. And for me, that is just such a powerful philosophical statement about life. Because it says you have to live for others, and that your existence and sense of self and who you are is integrated and integrally linked to others. I tell, when I teach this stuff, I say to Jamaicans, I'm not a Jamaican without all of you. Jamaicans are all of us together collectively. And as we started the program, the good and the bad. Jamaicans are not just the good ones and the bad ones, or the bad ones. We are all of that. So as human beings, we are the totality of the world, good and bad. And I want to make this point because it's a very important point in the context of what's happening in the world. If you think about our history and the inhumane atrocities that we've experienced under the institution of slavery. If you think about that, for more than 400 years, we've gone through that and the legacies. And few of us, if any, from the Caribbean that I am aware of, is riddled with the psychology of hate. In fact, it's the opposite. Our mindset is to love others. We created the most powerful song in the century, One Love. It's very powerful. And so it stems from that African philosophy. Somehow it was retained throughout all of that life and humanity is not about hate, intolerance, and doing back to others what they do to you.
I find that such a strong insight. Quite often when I have conversations with people about slavery, and I live in the UK, they would say, yes, but there was enslavement of the Irish, and there was enslavement of Africans by Arabs as well, and within Arabian countries as well. Why don't you talk about that and talk about that slavery? And the thought that came to me is that actually it wasn't slavery that was the atrocity. The atrocity was what was meted out in order to keep slavery running, and that was one, the dehumanization of Black people, which still continues and is written in books, and people have even gone to the lengths of using science to prove that it is true. And the second thing is the loss of philosophy and social understanding. Like the whole Ubuntu is now resurging, and Europeans will be using Ubuntu as a teaching that they've discovered in Africa as a way of people here would use it. There are loads of people who do TED Talks and so on talking about, we went to Africa and we saw this great, we observed this great philosophy of Ubuntu, and
Yeah.
here's how it looks, and here's how it makes you a better leader, and here's how it can lead to better society. And that aggravates me, because I'm like, but that's the stuff that was taken away from people. To tell them that, no, that's not a way of living, but here's this capitalist, individualistic way of living is better, and is what you should be aiming for. And I think that's the real atrocity that was meted out during that time.
I fully agree with you, and I think that it's a issue that we ought to be very thoughtful about and mindful of, because I think some of the perpetuation today is the view that if the truth goes out, there's going to be reverse atrocities, and so you have to keep this group of people down.
Yeah.
And I want to say to all of our white brothers and sisters who are listening to this, that's far from the truth. That's not our fundamental goals. Our fundamental goals are about being human and living with dignity as human beings.
Yeah.
It's not about trying to enslave another group of people if we had the choice to do so.
And by now we would have started to try to do it in various places across the world.
Right.
Whether it be
And in
South
some
Africa and the
ways,
US
and let's, in some ways, we should put in perspective human trafficking, which exists today, right? And we see that, and that's a very troubling, ugly sign that I would suggest is a fringe minority element of our society. And in fact, it's across all societies, not just us in the Caribbean, but in the West. But I say to people when I do work in that space that we should be leading the world against trafficking in humans. No other people in the world understands that better than us.
That's true.
So
true.
We have to root out those elements and remnants that are still there. And again, it's rooted in a perception of the world that says, I need to make as much wealth as I can.
Exactly.
And therefore, it doesn't matter how I create it. And so you seem to. I mean, we think about there must be a limit to wealth creation. I mean, I know that when you make enough and you don't see enough to spend on Earth, you can go to the moon or go into the stratosphere.
Oh, Mars.
We see that that's happening, but for those of us Earthlings, right, there are truly limits. And when you think about the wealth that's being created and how much it can eradicate things like poverty on this earth, you know that the problem is really a philosophy of life.
It is.
But I like this. I like this conversation. But I go back again to where you started with this psychology and how we break it. And even thinking outside the Caribbean as well, say even in Africa and what's not. Because we've bought into this unbridled capitalism philosophy. We've all bought into it in some form or fashion. And there are some very wealthy Black people. But we're not necessarily doing the things that you just talk about. Or we haven't really tapped into the Ubuntu way of thinking to use that within our own people. And I'm just wondering why you think that is.
I think because, again, they've bought into the status quo. I think there are lots of people who are in this society simply accepting the norms and in fact have a view that it can't be changed, not in their lifetime. And so they've made a conscious choice. I'll just keep doing what everybody else is doing, And I think that once you have that mindset, it's very difficult to change. And so to me, these are just inevitable consequences of a view of life that says, I define myself in terms of the scale of wealth that I can acquire. And and linked to that, the kinds of respect, falsely in many cases, and privileges that I get from it.
And we can see the effects of all of that chasing of capitalism on the world that we live in, and the environment that you so passionately also care about. Tell us a bit about how you're going about planting more than 1 million trees across the Caribbean to help protect us all.
Oh boy, this climate change is such a big deal. I mean, it truly is an existential threat for us in the Caribbean. I mean, our children's children may not only become climate refugees, it's happening now, where we literally have to, Montserrat, a couple of countries we're beginning to see. I mean, we saw it recently in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where people have to literally leave the island in the context of a climate disaster. So we have this problem where we're facing the repercussions of how we manage the environment and how we live in the world that are not dominantly created by us, I mean, all of the major polluters in the world and so on are elsewhere. And we are reaping the consequences. So for me, it's something that I think we all, as Caribbean people, have to put on our agenda. I mean, as you know, my background, economics, law, psychology, social science generally, had to stop and think and say, no, even lawyers, doctors, people who are not trained as environmentalists have to recognize that, we have to play a part. And so for me, that's where I am. And that's what I've been saying to Caribbean people, play a part. And the easiest thing we can do is plant a tree. And I can tell you, I'm one of those who never planted a tree in my entire life until I started this Caribbean tree planting.
So when we say plant a tree, what kind of tree, and where are we planting these trees?
Well, let me say this. Where
you always hear planting trees.
All right, fair enough. Some of us don't even have backyards, right? Because depending on where we live, that matters. But even to pot a tree in the home, because remember you have all of these, miniature trees, and they bear fruits. Because I love the idea of planting fruit-bearing trees.
Yes. I got one in my garden.
So for me, I think that idea of all of us taking responsibility to plant something that we could benefit from. Remember, even if it's not fruits, you can derive a lot from shaded trees. And with the heat that we have, some of which I'm experiencing right now here in Jamaica, right? Is you can benefit from trees, and so there's so many benefits to planting a tree, and we also do tree-related activities. So some of the work we're doing is to empower women, families through the value-added activities and products and services that come from trees. So this is something that we've recently done in Haiti, in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago with breadfruit. Breadfruit is, I'm not so sure whether hard bread or roast bread fruit is more popular.
For me, roast bread fruit every day.
Is a toss-up. I will take roast bread fruit any day.
Yes,
but hard bread, right? Healthier, definitely much more healthy. And so, we do a lot of that, and so we know, and we eat it. Just eat the breadfruit, roasted or boiled. But then we recognize that we can do a lot more with that. We can we've just come up with this idea of a breadfruit bulla here in Jamaica. Right? A bulla is just a very special bun that we have, right?
Yeah.
So we have that, and then there are breadfruit chips, breadfruit, all kinds of stuff. Breadfruit flour that's being made, you can bake stuff with it. So there's a lot we can do with trees, and it helps to build sustainability. Not just being able to protect the environment through all kinds of ways, the soil and the
breadfruit wine. I bet you never hear about that one there, yeah?
I never hear about breadfruit wine yet, but I suppose wine is a process as opposed to you can.
Well, let me tell you, there is such a thing as breadfruit vodka, right? Vodka made in Puerto Rico, I think it is, made out of breadfruit, yes.
Isn't there a guy in Barbados doing breadfruit?
Sweet potato vodka. Yeah.
Sweet potato vodka? Okay, yeah.
Wow. I must say though, growing up, my aunt Muriel, she was actually a home economics teacher, and she would have done so much stuff with breadfruit, including black cake, so drying the breadfruit and creating flour, a whole set of stuff
Black
that she did
kid.
that people are now doing.
So this is
Like-
the source. Is Muriel? Is Muriel fault?
They finally come out.
I learned a
Finally
lot
come
from
out.
her,
It's
but
Muriel fault.
but the thing is, she also didn't use like raisins and so on. She used dry dunks and plums and
It's
golden
Muriel,
apples
man. It's
and
Muriel.
so on.
Influence.
It's
But
Muriel.
what she just wanted to prove was that you could make a good pudding that's tasty just
And
using
what we
local
have.
ingredients. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that's something so significant
Yeah.
It's
for us.
Muriel.
As a way, it is. Well, partially. I think I was just surrounded by people who wanted to be culinary innovators. And I joined that gang.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Listen, don't go too far with that, Rosalie, because he will start to give you some recipes that you have not even
Exactly.
thought about.
Well, that's the creativity I love. And let me tell you,
Yeah.
I don't have enough time to cook, but when I do cook, what I try to be is as creative as possible.
Oh,
Whenever I
yes.
get a recipe, my approach to the recipe is how can I modify it?
Yes.
Ooh.
Oh.
Yeah.
Same
Next
thing.
time you are in England, we will make sure
You know.
that you visit.
Phil up
Phil.
there singing right now. You got
Exactly.
a friend in
Modification
me.
don't always work, you know.
People give me recipe books, and I look at them and I say, "Thank you very much for that." I just use it to get the general idea, but then I
Yeah,
run.
I agree.
Cook by taste, cook with what you have.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
how many other countries are involved in the tree planting project?
Well, you know, we've engaged 22 Caribbean countries and territories. In the first year, we had about 19 countries that were actively involved because, of course, we had COVID and not everybody could make it. You know, there are all kinds of issues there. But this year, we are hoping, in fact, to move from our 101.5 million we did in 2020 to 2 million. That's what we're aiming for at the end of this year. And so we have encouraged our tree planting ambassadors across the Caribbean to, to plant up a storm. And I hope you'll have them on your show. They're a fascinating set of young people, including in Barbados, I must tell you. There's a fabulous team in Barbados. And but across the region, in Trinidad and across the entire Caribbean, and they're doing wonderful work. And we're going to repeat. Last year we did the first ever Caribbean tree planting week.
Okay.
Where we had all these countries involved in planting trees and online activities, educational activities, etc. at the same time.
I'm planting trees and stuff. I 100% agree, but I wonder do you feel a bit, exacerbated by the lack of policy within the Caribbean when it comes to climate change and what have you, or the way how we still continue to do some of the same things that impact us, things like still building hotels on the beach rather than building it on land side, but still building it on the right up against the sand, but then we still talk about climate change. And we seem to, yes, planting the trees, I 100% agree with that, but then we have policymakers that do the complete opposite of what's needed in order for us to safeguard our livelihoods regarding climate change.
Yeah, that's an ongoing problem. A lot of real estate development that completely undermines this effort. We're hoping that we can be much more proactive in pushing towards a different, more participatory policymaking in the region. That I think the answers lie there. As long as policy continues to be shaped in the interest of those who can pay and influence political decisions, then we get those kinds of outcomes. If we get a more participatory decision-making process, in my mind, it doesn't mean that we won't have real estate developments or even bauxite companies for that matter. But that we will do it in a way that is respectful for the environment, that tries to balance
Yeah.
the issues
Yeah.
that touch and concern people's lives. And I think we must move towards a different governance arrangement that truly enables our people to have a voice. That's the essence of a democracy. And it's an issue that we have on the table now in Jamaica as we consider this move from a constitutional monarchical system, the Queen head of state, to a republic. And that conversation is about how we ought to deepen our democracy so that we can truly reflect the voice of our people.
I wonder how you felt when you saw our leaders in Scotland at COP26 making all the different noises they were making about their commitment to the environment. How did you feel?
I mixed empathy because I know that some of our leaders absolutely want to see changes, but also sadness because I am sure that there is some of that which is talk because it's not reflected in the kinds of decisions and choices that we see. Absolutely. And so, it is difficult. But, for me, I have a very easy answer. Now, easy answer in saying, not doing. The easy part of saying the answer is that the Caribbean people will have to find these answers.
Yes.
And I say it because so often we think that the government must find the answer.
So right.
And the government is us. We ought to put in power governments who reflect our will, and give us a voice and reflect our interests. And so I think that it's when we wake up to the reality that we own the Caribbean, we own our countries, we are the ones in charge. We hire our elected officials to represent us. And that we must actively engage and find the difficult solutions. And that's where it gets difficult, because that process of active engagement and shaping policy in the interest of all of us is a difficult quest, but that is the solution of a democratic society.
So what's making that so difficult? Because otherwise it seems a bit like an ideal. It's us, the people, sort of governing. What's missing from that engagement?
I think the idea is that, remember, if you think about our democracy and any democracy, we see it in the US, it's an ideal that you strive for decades and centuries to achieve.
Yeah.
And it's not an achievable state. It's a process of moving towards this ideal. And I think that's how I think about a democracy and fixing the system. And the challenges have to do with what we were talking about earlier, the persistence of these historical legacies and these institutions that are not changing, and people who feel that that's the way to organize society, that not all of us ought to deserve to live with dignity. Some of us are more deserving than others.
I definitely agree with you. And there would also be people who would refrain from giving their voice because they think the way I speak, the way I express myself, the way I've been educated, my experience is not going to be worthwhile. It's not going to have an impact. And no one wants to hear me.
Right.
And it's how do we change that perception that everyone knows, no, you absolutely matter. Your voice, however you say it, matters.
Yes. And I think this is where, for those of us who understand this and have been provided this opportunity to make a difference because of the places and the spaces that we occupy, ought to do more.
Yes.
I agree with that.
I challenge my academic colleagues all the time. I say, step up to the plate. You need to know. We need to hear, the society needs to hear the voice of credible academics who can ground their perspectives in evidence and in work that has credibility in the society. So we need to hear from them. We need to hear from our civil servants who are in those spaces and see things and they're silent. They need the bravery and the boldness to walk away sometimes and say and expose those problems because they know it more than us.
Yeah, and utilize, we talked about it earlier, and utilize different technologies and platforms. I mean, gone are the days now where you needed national radio or television to get your message out. You don't need to anymore. Now there's so many other ways. There's a plethora of other ways that you can do it. I just find that sometimes we as the region, we're not utilizing those other avenues and technologies and platforms to get the message out on certain topics in a way that we could, or in a way that we should be. I mean, having discussions like these is fantastic, but it feels that way. And I think Angela was saying it before, because that's where I was at. I think which brings us back full circle to where we started talking about the status quo and what have you. It feels as if we're always so worried about the bread and butter survival as a society, and then as governmental institutions as well, as small island economies, or small states rather, when we include obviously Belize and Guyana, Suriname, and what have you in the Caribbean family. We seem to be so caught up with survival economically that we don't even think about survival from a climate perspective until perhaps we will, when it becomes much more urgent than perhaps we think it is at the moment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's only when we get these climate events, the hurricanes, the floodings and stuff, that we begin to pay attention. But I think as they increase in frequency, the point will be coming home to more and more of us, I think, at a faster pace. And so we have to just keep pushing. The reality, however, is for many of us, it is still true that the bread and butter issues dominate. Because, it's very hard to ask a mother who has to feed her children that she needs to do something like, do stuff that, is about climate that may or may not happen, kind of thing.
Or care that real estate is being built on the beach down the road or something.
Exactly. There's absolutely. So,
But perhaps,
so we have to make that link better, because part of making that link is to say, you can do something like plant a tree. And if you plant a tree, that child can be fed. And you can benefit from shade and a number of other things that come from just that, having that tree in your space.
But perhaps that's one of the biggest risks with us suffering the impacts from climate change, the fact that we are so occupied with keeping the wolves from the door that nothing else is of any importance. So as much as and as credible as it is to try and save the planet and save our homelands, we don't have the space for that.
The mental space.
Yeah, we don't have the mental space for that.
Yeah.
So as important as it is, it gets away from us. And then we have to suffer the brunt of other people's decisions because we're too busy trying to keep the wolves from the door. That's the most important thing.
And so it's a 360 conversation to what will it take to keep those wolves from the door? And it is fundamentally about how we change the social and economic conditions of our people. So we're not just living hand to mouth, that we can lift the boat with all of us, and that we're not kind of widening this gap and making it worse for so many. So I think it's when we look through that lens that we begin to see we can find answers. If we can lift that boat, all of us are better off, and enough of us are able to pay attention on these particular issues that will affect us all.
Yeah.
And going beyond climate change, obviously, I know you're involved in so many different things from a philanthropic perspective. Tell us a little bit about some of the other areas you're involved in. And as well, from a philanthropy perspective, do you find Caribbean people are interested, are giving of their time, of their money, of their talents, and what have you?
Well, let me say the heart of philanthropy in terms of giving is the essence of the Caribbean. I think part of our survival to date is that we are a giving people. We're willing to help and willing to help others. That's the Ubuntu idea. Obviously, if you have little, then it's little material things, then you have little to give materially. But the giving spirit of welcoming people in your home and sharing what little you have is there and is evident. I think we've not established formal traditions of institutional philanthropy as much as other societies have. And so there are not a lot of formal foundations set up across the Caribbean. In Jamaica, there are several foundations, and I think that has grown significantly over the last 10, 20 years. My own foundation that I'm associated with, the Lasco Chin Foundation, we only came into being in 2019, where it was operationalized and we started to actively work. However, having said that, companies like the Lasco affiliated group of companies have done a lot of corporate giving. And so many companies give, and support and assist society. So the question of a more structured, organized flow of philanthropy is emerging, I would say, across the Caribbean. And the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is really positioned and interested in facilitating that. And our mission, of course, is to facilitate the achievement of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so, we started planting trees, to address the climate change problem. And we're also, trying to empower women. And these are the goals that you see is some of the goals that we're tackling. And what you see on the screen are some of the worst performing goals in the region. And we want to particularly pay attention to those. You'll see the climate change there, you'll see hunger, etc. So these are the goals that we're trying to address. And I think that, we're well positioned to do it. And if we can channel a lot of philanthropy to targeting these goals, it can accelerate our achievement of these goals.
And when you look ahead, we often like to ask our guests on this show, look ahead for us. This is a big area. You are across a lot of things: social change, the environment, trying to get people to be more engaged in what's happening in their lives around them locally. What kind of Caribbean do you see in a decade time? What's your ideal? What would you love to be able to sit down in 10 years time and look back on and say, you know what, that's good progress?
A more resilient Caribbean. I say more because we are resilient. We've survived for all these years. A more resilient Caribbean, in which there's no first class and second class citizen, right? Where that philosophy that holds one man and one race superior and other inferior is finally and permanently disbanded and forgotten. Behind us. That's the kind of Caribbean I would want to see. A Caribbean in which we really shifted that inequality that exists, because we know that we have the best experiences in the world, and that's why so many people come to the Caribbean to experience those places and spaces. But we want to see that all of us can live in dignity and respect. And I think, and I'd only add to that all of that is only possible when all of us in the Caribbean become more active, when we really begin to see our countries as belonging to us, not to foreigners, not to Britain, not to the Chinese, and not to government and other people that we say our country belongs to, but that it truly belongs to us, and we have a place, and that our voices can be heard. And I think it's that Caribbean that will lift all boats and create the kind of the standard of living and dignity that we all want.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been amazing to have you in the conversation today, Rosalie. It's amazing. And here's your social media handles and platforms. So guys, you can go and follow Rosalie. Lots happening there. Get involved. Get involved. I think that's the one thing that we want to leave with everybody, is that to get involved. There's so much to do, and so much, as people say, many hands make light work.
Absolutely.
And Rosalie's definitely involved in so many things. I'm sure hands from across the region would be amazing for her to help her with that. One other question I want before we go here, Rosalie. You've traveled across the region, I'm sure. where does cocoa and flying fish rate in your cuisine, culinary cuisine? I'm just curious.
Number one.
Right answer. I
I had to say that to make sure that my Bayesian hosts are happy.
So you're telling me the truth then?
Let me just say to my Jamaican audience, no place no better than home.
Yeah.
No place no better than
I should
yard.
caveat that. I said Jamaica notwithstanding, home I understand. Well, where does cocoa and flying fish? Assuming you've
No, man,
had
I have been to Barbados. I love Barbados. Barbados is really, really nice. And, but, there's all of us in the Caribbean have so many special, experiences to offer. It's an amazing place. And, for people in Britain and wherever is listening, if you haven't been to the Caribbean, like I started by saying, if you haven't been to Jamaica, half your life gone. If you haven't been to the Caribbean,
Yeah.
half your life lost. Because the truth is, I think we really are, let me say, country paradise. I don't want to feed into the idea that we're islands and it's all just sun, sun, and sea. We are countries struggling with some real issues.
Yeah.
But in spite of that, many of us have done well, continue to do well, and the promise for the future is only to be better than we are now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rosalie. Amazing. You answered well. I'll take the first answer, so we'll have you back. We'll definitely have you back. Thank you so much, Rosalie, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great.
Good conversation there, guys.
Yeah, fabulous, fantastic. There's so much happening across the Caribbean, and
There's so much to put our hands to.
Yeah.
Across
we
the
have,
region, I think.
We got to be motivated to do it.
We motivated to do it for ourselves, and I think that's some of the key things there as well. Because just as we tend to be consumers of things coming from outside and not necessarily supporting homegrown stuff as we should be, sometimes I think some of the issues we're dealing with as well, we seem to think they're going to be solved somewhere else by someone else. And quite frankly, even as we were talking about as well, capitalism comes into play with so many things. And as long as unbridled capitalism is really the continuous goal, things will only get fixed as it aids and abets capitalism. You know what I mean? The electric car stuff is only coming into being now because of, they find a way to capitalize on it.
Yeah, but even as we were discussing, Rosalie, there's something came to me that made me feel quite sympathetic towards our slow rate of change, right? Because there are always three things that you need to happen at the same time to get change going, and one is competency. To have the competency. Two is to have the confidence, which we talked about. And competency is, yes, we know how to do it and where we want to go. And confidence is we believe that we can do it. And then the third one is capacity. You actually have the time, the mental, whether that's mental capacity or resource capacity to do something that can make a change, to execute, right? And if you don't have those three in the right amongst at the same time, either change is not going to be happen, or you're either going to be focused on one. I think in the Caribbean, we are very competency focused. We learn a lot and acquire a lot of knowledge about how to do things. But then, as you mentioned there, Mark, capacity is sometimes a really hard thing to come by to actually shift things because we're focused on other stuff. Absolutely. And then confidence is our ongoing problem. So we have to figure out how do we focus. Maybe if we decouple those things and focus on them on three very intentional programs of this is really confidence focus. This is competency. Competency, we have loads of that. I think that's
that's our strong point in the treaties.
That's our strong point. But those two things, the confidence and having the capacity, seem to where we waver a lot.
It's where you need your politics to start to become very different, because the capacity is made when people don't feel as though their lives have to be pursuing, just trying to feed their kids every day. That's what life is about. And once that is the primary focus, you ain't got capacity for anything else. That's because true. That is too instrumental. That's about life. That's about keeping yourself alive, you and your family.
Yeah.
So unless you reset the politics and start to help people to recognize there's a different way that we can live, there's a different way that we can distribute wealth, you can't make the capacity. We will go around
Yeah.
this circle all the time.
And if you go after that way, you'll be okay. Because
Yeah.
you can tell someone, no, you don't have to make that your priority. Make this your priority. But how do you give that person the assurance that they will be okay and their children will be okay?
Yeah.
But when we talk about competence, yes, we focus a lot on confidence. I still think sometimes it's not necessarily focus on. I don't want to say they focus on the right areas, because I don't want to say that. I don't want to make it sound as if you're judging. But I think sometimes the inability for us to see connections, and the way how interdisciplinary connections.
I see
as
where you're
well.
going. Yeah, because that is a different issue in a sense.
Exactly, that's another
Different issue, but the same issue. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's an evolution of thinking that is required in order for us to be able to say, well, okay, I am a history major, but this is how coding helps me become a better coder, or how history helps me become a better coder, and be able to. I don't need a computer science degree in order to become a coder. It's just is a lot of uncoupling of ideas and thinking that we need to deconstruct in order to push us forward.
That's about connecting the dots.
Yeah.
We've got the learning. It is now, how do you repackage that into what it actually needs to be applicable for in the environment and where we're trying to get to moving forward, because that is still going to be important. Where you are and what you've learned, still important, but how do you shift that now into supporting where we are now trying to go? And sometimes we don't connect the dots consciously, and I think that was something that Rosalie was saying as well, actually.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Great conversation. But look, guys, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for being with us for the better part of an hour and a half or so. It's been a pleasure being here with you and being in your living rooms on this Sunday afternoon. Thanks a lot. As we said at the beginning, tag about 20 people just so that they can come in and see the conversation. You were part of it live, but of course, nothing wrong with them watching it back as well. If you haven't already, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. We Global, West Indians Global, we are there. Just follow us and just be part of our conversation. So much content is on our different social media pages that you can get stuck into. Very good Caribbean conversation. Us talking about ourselves among ourselves. And that's what we always want to do here in the living room. So look, as we always say, until next time, see you later.